Thank you. Well, today is June 6th, 2024. My name is Mark Carouse, and we're at the Texas Heart Institute in Houston, Texas, to interview one of the very early perfusionists, Terry Crane. This is being conducted on behalf of AMSECT. There is a history committee, and we've chosen subjects very carefully and looking at retired perfusionists for the most part now. Terry has had quite the career from the 1970s until 2022 when you retired. Is that right, Terry?
Retired in 2020.
2020.
Still came back and give lectures.
Well, we really appreciate you being here, and I'm delighted to be able to interview you. We've been friends for a long, long time. And without further ado, I'd like to ask a little bit about your background and what were the circumstances that led you to become a perfusionist, Terry?
Well, that was pretty easy. I had just finished my degree at West Texas State University in industrial education and was working in a laboratory at the hospital and the clinic, working my way through school. And while working in the lab, I heard about the THI School of Perfusion Technology from one of the people in the blood bank. So, and this was around 1972, and that's when the school started. So I applied for the program in '73, got accepted, and that kind of led me into the program. And it was a very unique part of my history, for the most part.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And where were you a lab tech? Was that in Amarillo?
Yes, in Amarillo, Texas, at the Amarillo Diagnostic Clinic and also St. Anthony's Hospital. So I worked at the clinic from 8 to 5 and at the hospital from 5:30 until 11 at night.
Oh, so you were really doing two jobs.
Yes, and that's part of the reason I could not come for an interview. I was probably the only candidate that never had an interview.
But did you talk with Charlie Reed over the phone?
No, I just sent a letter with my application indicating that I have two jobs, working 5 to 7 days a week. I don't have time for it. Please consider me. And they accepted me.
And did you grow up in West Texas?
No, really all over the country, from the south to the west, but through high school, basically Cotton Center, Texas. Very small town. There was probably maybe 15 people in my graduating class.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Small program.
So when you started in the training program here at Texas Heart Institute, how many students also started with you? How many were in your class?
The class sizes at that time period were relatively small, anywhere between 10 to 12 students per class. And we did have a few that dropped out during that period of time because it was a difficult program because it was new, it was starting, you're doing both academics and clinical. We might do clinical all day long and then do lectures 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So it was a long, harsh aspect of training.
And when did you start? Was it in January or July?
Yeah, after I graduated, I started at Texas Heart Institute as a staff perfusionist in January of '79. I'm sorry, I'm getting my dates mixed up, of '74. So when I first started. And so I worked as a staff clinician for about a year, and then Charlie Reed, the program director, and Diane Clark was the associate director of academics. They asked me to become the associate director of the clinical services about a year or so after I graduated. So in that role, I accepted it, and it was a good role because I had an opportunity to still do clinical cases, take care of equipment, supplies, and things that were necessary for the department. And but it did surprise me that none of the other staff stepped up for the position.
Sure. But backing up a bit,
mm-hmm.
When you started your training, what time of the year was that and how long was your training?
Oh, the training in the early days for Texas Heart Institute was, I started in July of '73 and graduated in December of '73. So it was a 6-month program, but it was, it felt like 2 years because again, you would do anywhere between 2 to 4 cases a day. Lectures sometimes would be in the morning, sometimes they'd be in the evening, late at night. You just never know. There was really no time off per se. In fact, my son was born in October, and I was fortunate that when my wife and brother-in-law called that morning, I was doing a pediatric case, so I had to finish the case first. Then I got to fly home, see the baby, and fly back the next day. So it was there was no time off to speak of. Yeah.
Oh boy.
So it was different, and eventually they did go to a 1-year program, and then an 18-month program. In a short period of time, they did have a bachelor's degree, but now it's back as a post-baccalaureate certificate program.
Sure, sure. Do you remember any of the other trainees that you worked with in 1973 that essentially started at the same time you did, Terry?
Oh, yes. Most of the people have since retired or passed away, but a very good friend of mine is Bill King. He lives in Florida, and we still see one another about once a year or so. Kathy Spiller lives down in Galveston, and there was a few others that just kind of lost touch with over the years.
Sure, sure. And was Charlie and Diane Clark the director, co-director?
Yes, Charlie was the director of the program, and Diane was the associate director of academics.
Okay.
And I remember that first year, around 73, 74, they started writing a book together on perfusion. And we were fortunate as staff people because we were able to get copies of each chapter before it was ever published.
Oh.
So that certainly helped us out. And one of the companies, the William Harvey Corporation, used to give away those books to the students and other people around the country. And it was very noticeable how it helped, because it did cover anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, perfusion, whereas I consider our Bible, Heart-Lung Bypass by Galletti, a little bit more in depth than what they did, though.
Sure, sure. Now, you mentioned lectures sometimes taking a back seat to the clinical load.
Yes.
Who lectured the students back then, Terry?
In the earlier days, it was the physicians, so like Dr. Arthur Keats, chief of anesthesia, Dr. Gergis, Dr. Sager, so some of the anesthesiologists gave the lectures. And then, of course, we also had some of the other surgeons, Dr. George Rule, Dr. Grady Hallman would give lectures. Some of the lectures were given by the perfusion staff, but it was kind of a mixture between both, and who was available and what the particular topics were. In fact, I recall the day or before my son was born, I was having a lecture from Dr. Keats on, I think it was maybe acid-base balance and et cetera. And so it was, I still have those notes they're written on paper towels, by the way. We didn't have notebook paper like the kids do today, or computers. So I had some paper towels to take my notes on.
Sure. Well, how, as you look back, there's been a tremendous evolution in perfusion education. How would you characterize your experience in 1973 with what's going on in the program today?
I'm not sure exactly what's going on today, but I can say from a historical standpoint, it was an extremely difficult program to go through. It was because Charlie was trained in the military. In fact, he even convinced me to push people to the limits and one step beyond. I did that for a couple of years and decided that was probably not the best way to treat people. It was like when I started, you would complete a procedure. As soon as you left the room, you go clean your instruments, because everything was stainless steel back in those days for the most part.
Sure.
We'd clean them and sterilize them, but we may not get approval how clean they were until the mop came out of the room, because you had to be back in the operating room. Your feet had to be in the OR as soon as the mop came out, or you could be dismissed from the program. If you were caught reading other material other than perfusion technology, like a newspaper or magazine, that was not good for you either. So again, we did push people to the limits. But over the years, I think we did a much better job in regards to expanding the length of the program. We also trained students to be surgical assistants or perfusion assistants, physician assistants. So I was considered as a perfusionist and a physician assistant, because we would help take vein, open chest, and things of that nature, pull chest tubes, and whatever the case may be. So we had a great diversity of training and a considerable number of cases, because you could do 2 to 4 cases a day between Dr. Cootie, Dr. Rule, Dr. Hallman. We always did our pediatric cases first in the morning, and that was usually Dr. Cooley, Dr. Grady Hallman, and Dr. George Rule. And then after those cases were done, we would do our regular valves and coronaries, and then we would reserve our aneurysms until later in the afternoon and try to be out of there by 6 or whatever.
Sure.
And doing 10, 20, 50 cases a day.
So that was really a very heavy caseload, even back in the early 70s.
Right. And it became easier also when we went from stainless steel reusable devices like that to disposable devices, because then you could buy a disposable kit that had connectors and suctions and cannulas and things like that. So the rooms turned over much, much faster that way.
Sure.
So, and we could do more in a day.
Tell us a little bit about what equipment you use, starting with the oxygenator.
Ooh, wow. The oxygenators, readily admit, were the bubble oxygenators. And being a teaching institution, we used them all. I recall using the Travenol 2LF for pediatrics, the Travenol 6LF for adults. We also used the Bentley, we used the William Harvey, we used the Shiley. Now, of course, many of these companies mergers and things like this. So Bentley and then Baxter, and then eventually we got into membrane technology, and we used the Symed Colabote lung. This is about the same time that the Travenol TMO was being used, and so we were trying that out also, and so all of that was wonderful. Our heart-lung machines were basically either the Travenol modular type pumps where you would adjust the occlusions with the wrenches, or the deluxe Sarnes heart-lung machines. They were consoles at that time, and some of them actually had the built-in heat exchangers for the water. Yes. So it was very easy to attach the lines over to the oxygenators. Back in those days, things were very, very simple because we only had the arterial pump head because we were using the bubblers, and we had the 2 suctions, and that's about it. Cardioplegia eventually came on board many years later, but usually, historically, Dr. Cooley was just administering cardioplegia from the head of the table, so we didn't have to deal with that. So it was a very, extremely basic circuit, very basic. Compared to today, extremely, extremely complex.
Sure. And I believe Texas Heart was not at the forefront of using arterial line filtration, were they?
No, absolutely not. Charlie felt that was not needed or necessary at that particular time, and even some of the conferences they went to with the pro and con debates over arterial filtration, I was on the side for filtration, and that created a little bit of conflict between he and I at one time because I'd read so much about it, and I thought, why not? This is the right thing to do. And I thought it was interesting too because we had done a considerable amount of studies using transfusion filters, and even the blood that we bagged at the end of cardiopulmonary bypass, we used transfusion filters. And Dr. George Rule was extremely helpful with us in regards to filtration. As I recall, I think after Charlie had some surgery done on his legs at one time, I think he changed his mind about filtration.
Okay.
And then he allowed for arterial filtration to come to board. Yes. So we were a little slow in that area.
I believe one of the real proponents of filtration was Dr. Thomas Solis.
That's who we did our studies with. Absolutely. Dr. Solis and Charlie and myself and Dr. Rule, Georgia Rule. That's where we did a lot of our studies from. And in fact, as I recall, Dr. Slees also helped us with our pre-bypass filtration studies, because in those earlier days, we could add a liter of crystalloid to the bubble oxygenator, and you would swirl it around, and it looked like a snow globe. I mean, it was horrible. And so we would drain that out, add another liter, swirl it around, drain it out, and we kept doing that. And I'd go through maybe 20 liters of crystalloid just to rinse out the oxygenator. So we acquired or purchased some millipore pre-bypass filters, and we would attach those between the arterial, we'd sterilize them, and then we'd attach them between the arterial and venous lines. We'd prime them with like 2 liters of crystalloid, recirculate for 5 minutes for 2 liters per minute. And then we would take the filters out of the disc, and we would take them to my office. I had a microscope there, and we would count the particles. And that's where we found out that there was a considerable amount of microemboli from classically the nylon trico. And this is again when they used nylon, which we found out later was a complement activator. But we found that, and undissolved crystals and all kind of things. So we filtered all of our circuits. We told the medical manufacturers about this, and of course they all went back and they cleaned up their clean rooms considerably. The only device that did not have a high particle count was the Travenol 2LF and the 6LF for adults and pediatrics, because those are just basically two sheets of dielectrically heat-sealed material together. There was no nylon tricot socks or anything like that around at that time.
Sure.
So those were the cleanest, but the companies did clean them up. Our studies did indicate we reduced our neurological deficits by doing that also.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was good.
Now, you've mentioned some of the surgeons you worked with.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Dr. Arthur Keats.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit more about how the perfusion team interacted with the anesthesiologist,
Right.
and in particular Dr. Keats, because he was a towering figure.
He was. And Dr. Keats was a remarkable man, not just as an anesthesiologist, but also as a person. So again, we were very fortunate to have him give us lectures and et cetera, but also in a leadership role, because the perfusion department reported to the anesthesia group. So he believed, and I must admit I do also, which is during cardiopulmonary bypass, the anesthesiologist administers the drugs. We don't. Perfusionist, you're running the perfusion machine and et cetera. Your concentration should be on your operating level and other parameters, but not administering drugs during cardiopulmonary bypass. So I'm still old school like he was, and so they always gave all the drugs during bypass. And so that was very helpful to us. It was great, it really was.
I've often thought that when cardiac surgery's taking place,
Mm-hmm.
the surgeon is preoccupied with the operation.
Sure.
And the anesthesiologist, at least in my experience, was always an ally. If there
Mhm.
was some issue that would come up, you could always
Absolutely.
consult with the anesthesiologist and
Mhm.
say whatever to
Mhm.
make things get back on the track, so to speak.
And the other nice thing too is he didn't administer protamine and allow us to run our suctions any longer. We always turned off our suctions when protamine was administered, and therefore we never had any problems. But over the years, different anesthesiologists, different surgeons have different theories and practices on that, and hence the reason they do administer protamine after bypass and before the suctions are turned off, and you wind up with occasional clotted circuits too,
Sure, sure,
which was not good.
sure. Tell us about some of the surgeons. Obviously, Dr. Cooley was a profound influence, but who stands out? You've mentioned 2 or 3 names. Tell us a little bit about some of the surgeons you worked with, Terry.
Sure. Well, Dr. Cooley obviously was the first and foremost, because working with him at the operating room table and also as a perfusionist both, I learned a lot in techniques and technology both, because he could show me techniques on how for cannulation and cutting lines and et cetera that I never even thought of. So that was great. And he was very warm and respectful during surgery. Then Dr. George Rule was great also, because he was a very good surgeon for adults and pediatrics, and to the point, for any of these surgeons, by the way, I could literally turn my back to the operating table with a student if I wanted to, and tell them exactly what was going on, because having worked with these people for so long and so many procedures, you could tell if they were on their right, the weight was on the right leg or the left leg if they were doing a proximal or distal, obviously. You could count, listen to the needle holder, and each click, 1, click, 2, click, click, click. After about 5 clicks, you know that they're going to pick up the other end of the suture to do the other part of the anastomosis. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then they're going to stop, elbows would be moving, scissors would come by, so you could tell exactly where they were during the procedure. And with that being said, it was really nice, because like Dr. George Rule, I could turn our suctions on. To me, perfusion is not just a science, but also a fine art. In other words, you should be able to turn up your sump or your vent accordingly to the amount of collateral flow coming back to the heart. And so I would have the students increase and decrease the speed of the sump or the vent just enough to get the blood out. So the people at the operating room table didn't have to put in vents and valves and needles in their suction lines. It was just anticipate the needs of the surgeon and the demands of the patient. And by staying ahead like that, you could do a remarkable job. Sure. Now, Grady Hallman was very, very meticulous. And again, with pediatrics, the first thing in the morning, then the second case with the adults, and et cetera. But very meticulous in how he opened the chest, how he cannulated. He was a remarkable teacher also, because he would fill the aortic cannula appropriately. He'd have us run the fluid to the end of the arterial line, not over, just to the end of the arterial line itself, and meticulously just attach the two together, and never get blood or anything on his fingertips. And not just a teacher in the operating room for cardiac surgery, but he also played classical music, which he told us and taught us about what was playing and what it meant, and et cetera. And eventually, I ride a motorcycle to work every day, and I don't drive cars. And I would actually play classical music all the time. I just love it. And I don't know what it means like we did, but I like the music itself. And so many people would stop me in the parking garage or some gas station and say, "Why are you listening to that?" Because I like it. So Grady Hallman had an impact on my life also. Sure. And of course, Dr. George Rule, because of just filtration, and eventually even autotransfusion. Because for autotransfusion, we purchased a cell saver in the early, mid-70s, but we never collected enough blood for Dr. Cooley for us to process, because he just didn't lose that much blood. So we kept it around for about a year. It wasn't used, but maybe one or two cases, and we couldn't even process the blood. So we put it in the storage room for many, many years. Eventually, cell savers became more popular with other physicians, lost a little bit more blood, operating room times were a little bit longer, et cetera. And so we did order and purchase new, cell savers. And Dr. George Rule helped me out on that aspect of it too, because the STS, standards and guidelines and all indicated the need for these types of devices. So he asked me to write a letter to the physicians about using cell savers. So I went down to my office, wrote this letter, brought it back to his office, and said, "Well, Dr. Rule, listen to this. Dear doctor, you must start using a cell saver tomorrow." And I said, "I don't think that's going to go over too well." And I said, "Dear doctor, I wish you would use a cell saver tomorrow." And I said, "That's not going to work either." I said, "Let's face it, they have the utmost respect for you as a cardiac surgeon. I would appreciate it if you would do this instead." And he did. And the next morning, he said, "Next morning, you have cell savers in all those operating room tables."
Wonderful.
And it just immediately worked. It great. It was wonderful. And again, being able to collect data from all of that. It was very beneficial to how much blood we were able to process and retransfuse, and how much it saved the hospital.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, before we leave some of your background, what sort of certificate or diploma was awarded to the graduates of the perfusion training program here? Was it a St. Luke's or a Texas Heart?
Oh, no, it was Texas Heart. And a lot of people get this confused. The Texas Heart Institute is a research and educational foundation. The hospital itself initially was actually Texas Children's and St. Luke's together. And eventually Texas Children's Hospital split off. St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital was acquired by the Catholic Health Initiative, so now it's called the St. Luke's Hospital, CHI. And so there was always that separation between Texas Heart versus that. As far as Texas Heart goes, we held the perfusion department and the school for, 30 or 40 years, a long time. But eventually the perfusion department started reporting directly to the hospital here. But Texas Heart and the school remained separate of that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more too about, I didn't realize that you trained as a physician's assistant. Was that a similar
yes.
certificate from PHI?
No, actually we applied to the physician assistant program to their organization. And some of us applied for it and was awarded, like I was awarded as a PA and had a license in it for many years. I let it drop. If I were to go back now, I certainly couldn't even do it now because of the credentialing required for it now is a master's type program. But we had done so much back in those earlier days as physician assistants. Again, like I said, assisting at the operating table and running the pump. So sometimes we may carry the lines to the operating table and stay up there and assist until it come time to run the pump. Then we would take off our gown and gloves and run the heart-lung machine. And at the end of bypass, we may, when we were off bypass, scrub and gown again and assist closing. So it depended upon the circumstance.
So
But a great experience.
Perspective.
Oh,
Having.
yeah, you have a whole new respect for the physicians, and they have a greater respect for you when you know exactly what they're going through, standing there for hours on end or whatever the case may be. And the other secret I found was that working at the operating room table, you can also hear all the little tiny whispers and conversations that are going on in the room. Now, when you're sitting behind the heart and lung machine, you don't know that. So it's a unique thing that I found out.
Sure, sure. I'd like to shift gears now a bit, Terry, and ask you about some of your career highlights.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, what were some of the most notable perfusion practice changes or innovations that occurred during your practice as a perfusionist? You've already mentioned pre-bypass filtration.
Sure, right. Well, even going from roller pumps to centrifugal pumps. I recall, I will never forget this, because Dr. Kletchka had come here to the Texas Heart Institute in 1975 to show us and Ed Rafferty, and to show us their new Biomedica centrifugal pump. And we were just amazed by the technology. It was incredible, because everybody used roller pumps up until that date and time. So we ran it in the lab for a few days, and then I recall it was on August the 14th, 1975. The reason I can't forget it because it was the day before my birthday. And equally as important, we thought we were scheduled for an adult patient that morning. Well, when I got here, it was actually a pediatric case. It was a 10-year-old Jehovah's Witness patient. And so it was and so we were wondering, should we be using this Biomedicus pump on a pediatric patient? They said, absolutely, it's not a problem. It flows from here to there, it's not a problem. So it didn't have a hand crank system. So what Charlie and I did, we took a segment of tubing from the hard shell, or from the reservoir of the oxygenator. Again, remember, this is bubble oxygenator technology at that time. And we ran it through a roller pump, through the centrifugal pump, and then up to the table, or to the table, or to the patient. And so just in case something failed, we would at least have our roller pump as a backup system to it. So that was a pretty significant jump. And I know that technology alone made a significant difference in patient outcomes for the future. It definitively did.
Really?
Absolutely, especially for lost operating levels during cardiopulmonary bypass, blow-off lines, and preventions of this. And so it had many advantages. And then, of course, that was the basis for all centrifugal pumps that are on the market today. And then, of course, the roller pump technologies, they certainly changed over the years considerably, from using wrenches up to using deluxe occluders and et cetera. And they had new safety devices. That was really nice also. And of course, technology in regards to bubblers, to membrane technology has changed. Blood filtration has certainly changed. Priming volumes, smaller circuits, all of these things have contributed. But the other things that I recall was the inline sensors. That was a huge jump forward too for us. We didn't have to wait 5 or 10 minutes for our blood gas results to come back.
Sure.
So that was very helpful, very beneficial. And of course, auto transfusion certainly came out a lot more over the years. And so there was a lot of these changes like that. And then of course, in the last several years, you have data acquisition.
Yes.
That's a huge advancement in many regards. Not that I know how to use it, but I'm used to a paper chart. But the fact remains that you can take data and analyze that data and do comparisons and evaluations and et cetera. And I think that's just remarkable how they've come far in that aspect.
Sure.
And it's legible. It's printed out.
Sure. So with the volume of cases here, and I collected an interesting statistic when I was in Galveston. I think in the late 70s, 1/7 of all open heart procedures in the United States were performed in Harris County. Mm-hmm. That was due to a large part, obviously, with Texas Heart and Methodist and some of the outlying hospitals. So here's the follow-up question to the technological advances. Because Texas Heart was doing so many cases, did you frequently see industry representatives, not salespeople, but engineers coming to observe, pick your brain?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we even had a program set up here at Texas Heart that we allowed them to come in and observe cases, and we would talk about what they saw and et cetera. And it was a huge benefit for the companies because they were able to visualize what we did, how we did it, the impact of certain things. And even when I went to work for medical manufacturing, it wasn't allowed to bring them into surgery per se, but I could take them to the observation dome. So it didn't matter if it was a company that was providing cardboard boxes for shipping, or a mold maker for making plastic parts, or it didn't really matter what they were. They all had, basically we required that they all come here and observe open heart surgery because we wanted them to have a better respect for what they did and how the impact it was on the patient. So yes, it definitely helped up those companies. Plus they had, because we had a diversity of devices, that was another benefit for them. So they were able to see all the different types of bubble oxygenators and membrane oxygenators and pumps and cell savers. It was a huge, huge advantage. But today, I don't know that you could probably do that with the rules and regulations restricting people in the operating room, which is a shame. Yeah, it really is.
Well, you touched on this early on in this interview, and that is you obviously mentored and taught a lot of students over the course of your career. Can you give us a guesstimate of how many you think you've mentored, Terry?
Actually, it's pretty close. It's about 1,000 Texas Heart people that I trained. And then it was very rewarding. But obviously some of them didn't make it out of the program, as with any program. And some people stayed in it for perfusion for long periods of time. Some of them became program directors, perfusion program directors. Others became chief perfusionists around the country. Leaders in the field, as I refer to it, in AMSEC and the academy and places like this. So it's very rewarding to see how they've done those things like that. Published and presented papers, helped and assisted on books and et cetera. So I'm very pleased at that outcome.
Sure, sure. And have you maintained contact with some of those students over the years?
Quite a bit.
Okay.
I do try to keep up with as many as possible. And I say I keep up with them. They don't know that I'm looking for them or I'm looking at them. It's kind of like when I would go to a perfusion conference and I would listen to everybody, and everybody knew that when I go to a conference, I'm sitting by myself, I'm listening, taking copious notes about what's going on. And some of those graduates I met years later, either through the hiring process or finding them a job. And they felt it was so strange that I could remember their particular presentation and that I would write them a letter of recommendation. And it was based upon, I would pick up their resumes at the meetings, whether I could hire them or not, because I was interested in what their talents were and their expertise.
Sure.
So I keep up with people in the sense from afar, but not up front and close, no.
Well, you shared an interesting anecdote when we were putting together the tribute for David Palazzo, and that is Dr. Cooley apparently was very interested in the notes you took at the meetings. Is that right?
Oh, yes. In fact, when I would come back from the conferences, Dr. Cooley always wanted my notebook from there. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I said, I'll give you a clean copy, but I'm not going to do that. And the reason why is because I would scribble and I might or might not spell something correctly because it was just scribbles and drawings and things of that nature. And Dr. Cooley was very meticulous about what he said, how he said it, and what he wrote and everything else. So I was embarrassed by that. He said, that's okay, I'll take the clean copy. So I always provided him with a clean copy from the American Academy every year, and AMSEC too. And because he was very interested in what our perfusion groups were doing to help improve these techniques and technology.
Sure, sure. Well, you've been an AMSEC member, according to your resume. You started off in 1974.
Yes, right after
until you retired. That's quite a long period to be an AMSEC member.
Yeah.
And then when licensure came in Texas, it was required that perfusionists had to become licensed in the state of Texas. That was from what, 1995 until you retired as well.
Yeah, I have a low number on the sort of licensure number.
Do any cases stand out in your mind that you want to share with us, either good or bad, Terry?
Oh, sure.
I mean, obviously every perfusionist remembers some of the bad cases,
Yeah,
but
sure.
any good or bad cases stand out in your memory?
One that just comes to mind real quick is because it was a basilar artery aneurysm repair, and the neurosurgeon wanted to do it using deep hypothermia and circulatory arrest.
Okay.
So I was the clinician on the case, and I had a student with me assisting, and I'd never worked in a neuro case before, and when the equipment that they used started going and sawing and cutting, and the sound itself, I became extremely lightheaded. I thought I was going to pass out.
Oh no!
I mean, I was that. Perfusion, not a problem. Canyons in, deep hypothermia, circulatory arrest, that type of thing, and I just kind of got through that one. And so the second case, I was mentally prepared for those sounds, so I made it through okay on the second case. But that first case, it was scary. It really was.
You're talking about the saw as they cut through the cranium.
Yes, and I just had never heard that before. I mean, a sternal saw versus that saw was totally different.
Okay.
So that was definitely a remarkable case. And then, of course, there was many adults and pediatrics and things that we had done, that unique methods and techniques that Dr. Cooley and others would use. But that one definitely stands out. And then, of course, that using that biomedicus pump on that first biomedicus pump, that really stands out too.
Were you present for any of the artificial heart or LVADs that were put in here?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when I first started in the 70s, Dr. Jack Norman was over the research lab and working on ventricular assist devices, total artificial hearts, and that circulatory support areas, intra-aortic balloon pumps. And but back in those days, because everything was started up by the cardiovascular research lab, they had their own balloon team, the VAD team, and et cetera. And of course, the presentations back in those days, how soon that these things are going to hit the market and be readily available, et cetera. And here it is, 50 years later, and they have improved, they have gotten better. And in the course, being here with Dr. Bud Frazier and using all of those various ventricular assist devices and total artificial heart work that they're doing now, it's just absolutely remarkable. And I'm just pleased that I got to see it in my lifetime.
Sure, sure. Could you tell us a little bit about teamwork and how important that is, and be specific, maybe with some examples of how teamwork worked in your setting?
I always told the students and staff that the classic terminology, team together, everybody accomplishes more. And so as the program director and the head of the department, I would try to make assignments to everybody, various assignments, whether it be equipment, supplies, or whatever the case may be. But I always had a backup person for it also. Not to infer that the other person was not competent. It's just the reason I'm doing this is because in the event you're on vacation, you're sick, somebody's going to be there to help take the load off. So that's the reason I did that partnership, that teamwork element. When we were writing our policies and procedures, they would classically, people would say, well, just let the students do that kind of stuff. Well, I didn't. I made sure that there was a staff person and the students writing policies and procedures together. I said, for example, a staff person may say, open up the package and assemble the circuit. Well, that's not quite it. We need a little bit more detail than that, using aseptic technique and et cetera. So that was part of the teamwork. In surgery, I always tell the students that you need to use the terms of challenge response. If a surgeon says something to you, you need to respond back accordingly, because it'd be very easy to misinterpret what they said, just like the sump off or sump on or whatever, or suctions and et cetera, or even going on cardiopulmonary bypass. There's a big difference between ready to go on versus radio on. So again,
good point.
Challenge response is extremely helpful. You're given heparin at the beginning of the bypass. Is the heparin in? And so I think that's very, very important, that challenge response. And it's all, again, part of the teamwork. The other part I try to emphasize to the staff is that it's extremely important that we work closely with the students today, because they are going to be an extension of you when you leave here. And it could be that a member of your family or a friend is going to have surgery in another city or another state, and you want to know that you've done your best to create the best student outcome, as it were. So that's where it all kind of comes in together like that.
Sure, sure. You mentioned before we sat down for this interview that you've got some artifacts at your home. Would you be willing to share some of those, or photographs of
Sure.
of what you've
Be glad to.
collected over your career?
I have several hundred boxes that I'd have to go through because I've collected things for over 50 years, and I have about 2,000 square feet worth of storage. None of the boxes are labeled, so I've been going through them since I retired, and I have found a few items. For example, the stainless steel cannula, the stainless steel suction, stainless steel connectors, and things like that from my time period. Found some old flat disc and convoluted disc, and so try to put that up. I still have all my medical books, and then as far as oxygenators, I have probably every bubble oxygenator on the market, bags and bubblers and the hard shell bubblers and membranes and technology like that. I have a wide variety of heart-lung machines or pumps, small modular pumps. So be glad to share them with you. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
I know I've asked you in the past for product information. You always had
Yeah, sure.
all the
I collected
instructions
all
for use.
Yeah,
It was very helpful.
From all those various companies. It was very helpful, and now I'm trying to decide to keep them or throw them away.
As we look at, before we get to the final section, I wanted you to expand a bit on when you left Perfusion and went to work for industry. You actually didn't leave Perfusion, did you? Because you
No.
maintained
I kept my
your
certification.
cases,
Yes.
but tell us what prompted you to move over to the manufacturer side.
Charlie Reed actually encouraged me to do so. And I went to work initially with Texas Medical Products, and then worked as a technical specialist type person, product specialist. And then basically they knew my background, which was an industrial education, which was basically engineering too. So they also knew that I had designed and manufactured numerous medical devices in my apartment, in my home, before 1976. So they knew I had that expertise. And going to work for the company, I worked in technical support, engineering, eventually became vice president, general manager. But it enabled me to design and develop things to improve things. For example, disposable suctions versus stainless steel. And again, just throw them away. Tubing organizers, keeping things organized on the operating room table to prevent reverse lines, as an example.
Sure.
Working on the air aspirator needle, it could remove more air and things from multiple locations than any other device on the marketplace. Connectors. Most of the connectors back in the earlier days had what we refer to as a parting line on that last barb.
Yes.
Well, when I went to work in manufacturing, we were able to remove the parting line on the last barb because of how you designed the mold. And that was a big difference also. Cannula prices were like, for example, approximately $20 for a cannula. Well, I could make cannulas for about $2 to $5 for sale. And so I developed methods and techniques to polish the tips, bevels, and etc. Dr. Cooley one day, he even asked me one day, I was in surgery, he says, do you think you can make a single atro cannula? And I said, well, yes, sir. And so I cut off the end of a venous line and cut some holes into it. There it went into the heart. I thought, okay. And then he said, well, what about for a smaller patient? And I cut off the end of the arterial line, 3/8, put some holes in it. So that became our 43 French and the 52 French single atro cannula that were used for years in this institution. And but again, the cost to the hospital was $5 or $10 a piece versus the new sophisticated 2-stage wire reinforces that are probably $30 or $40 a piece.
Sure.
And then it was just things like that made a difference. And the aortic cannula is the same thing again. Just extrude the tubing with a certain transition zone, limiting the amount of the taper zone. And mostly 3/8 as an example to a 24 French tip, reduced your pressure drop across it and significantly improved those outcomes. So it was great to be able to design and develop devices that people wanted and people needed, and they weren't overpriced none of them were overpriced. It was great. It was fantastic.
Very good. For the last section, which we've titled Perspectives, Philosophies, and Reflections, what do you think are some of the personal attributes that contribute the most to a person potentially becoming a perfusionist? Because you obviously interviewed prospective students.
Yeah, we would interview anywhere between 100 to 300 people for and accept 8 or 10, and that was twice a year. So,
and what were you looking for when you interviewed?
For myself, I was looking for several things. Number one, the work ethic. Well, how do you define work ethic? Well, first of all, I prefer hiring people that have a strong work ethic. It means not just being at work at 7 o'clock, because that's what time you start, but being there 30 minutes to an hour before. I believe that you should be in the operating room before then, and et cetera. So when you're talking to these applicants, you're looking for diversity also. So you're looking for that work ethic and diversity. As an example, I recall one time I was interviewing a couple of boys, and they were from the same city, same college, and et cetera. Both of them were laboratory technologists. Well, so I had that background also. So I asked some key questions about chemistry, hematology, and bacteriology, and et cetera. Well, one of them was a specialist, chemistry only. The other one was a generalist, like I was. You do a little bit of everything. It's called that concept of, was it jack of all trades, master of none?
Right.
And that's who I accepted. Now, the other boy could reapply, but he never did. And that diversity, I think, is extremely important, because it is people that have these various skills, even mechanical skills. There are certain people that when you're talking to, you know that they have a mechanical aptitude, whether it be working on a car, building furniture, remodeling, plumber work, electricians, and et cetera. And again, our graduates or students that we did accept have a wide diversity of educational backgrounds. We literally had police officers, we had military personnel, and of course they were great because they were disciplined and had a strong work ethic. But then you had even the farmers, the people that wanted to change their degree and get out of the farming and get off the cotton farming, et cetera, and come in and become a perfusionist. They wanted to make a difference in their life. Baseball players, they wanted to change in their life. And you knew that there were certain characteristics of these people. I recall one interview I'll never forget. The young lady was talking about working on the farm, and et cetera, et cetera. And toward the end of the interview, I said, show me your hands. And so she showed me her hands with the palms up. And I said, thank you very much, that's it. And then she left the room. And the other people on the interview committee asked me, what was that all about? I said, if you ask any girl to show you their hands, they're going to do with the palms down, classically. But when she turned hers up like this, and you saw those calluses on her hand, she is not afraid of work. And so that's the reason I selected her. Sure. And it's the same thing with the single mothers. I recall a single mother one time talking about she didn't have any work experience. And I said, well, we're going to stop the interview right here. I said, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to explain something to you. As a single mother, you have a job that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You help lead, guide, and direct your children. You help take care of them. You help take care of others, everything. I said, so do not tell me you don't have any work experience. You have plenty of work experience. So the interview process is a very difficult one to go through. You would like to say it's 100% correct. It's not. But we got very, very close. And seeing how the people conducted themselves in the interview, the classic, do they listen to you? Are they breaking out in a sweat? Which I understood, they're nervous.
Sure.
And so I could overlook even that. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is sort of a two-part question. First of all, what does it mean to you now that you're retired to have been a perfusionist? And expand on that by telling us a little bit about what were some of the personal satisfactions and the rewards during your career as a perfusionist, Terry?
Oh, wow.
What did you enjoy the most?
The most I enjoyed was, of course, teaching the students. Now, in the earlier days, I'm sure the students wouldn't agree with that, but I really did enjoy it. And even when I did in the earlier days, push them to their limits and one step beyond. But it was rewarding in the fact that I knew that when they graduated, because Charlie says, Terry, after they leave here, you no longer have control over their lives or their education or their experiences or anything else. The best they can do is maybe go to a book, but they're not going to be here to ask those questions and to also help them through difficult times. And so I understood. So I felt very comfortable that the majority of these people did extremely well jobs. I also knew that many of my family members required open heart surgery before in the past, for a wide variety of reasons, all over the country. And I thought to myself, you know, I want to make sure that if they're having surgery, they're being taken care of very well. And I've had some of my family members and all done by graduates from other programs. But that's fine, because I know that in talking to people around them and et cetera, that they're doing the best that they can to take care of that particular patient or my family member or close friends. So that was very important. And it just seems today there's more and more of my friends and family requiring surgery for a wide variety of reasons all over the country. And it's just very rewarding to know that the outcomes were good. They're going to turn out to be very good. Absolutely, sure.
Sure. Now, you've mentioned Charlie Reed many times over the last several minutes. Tell us a little bit about Ray McInnes, because didn't he succeed Charlie as the director?
As a matter of fact, Raymond came in to play, and it was a perfect opportunity, because this is at the time that they wanted to go to a bachelor's program with the University of Texas Health Science Center. And Raymond had a master's degree in education, and Raymond did a remarkable job in reorganizing the school into a bachelor's program, and did a great job. And then academically and et cetera. And so that worked out beautifully. And when Raymond retired, I was just working here like a couple of days a week at that time as a part-time employee. And I asked Raymond, I said, well, do you think it'd be okay if I applied for your job? And he said, sure, go ahead. So, and I was really surprised that he was supportive, because I was not too kind to Raymond when he was in school. And I think I had him come home he had already gone home one night. I had him come back up to the hospital to clean a heart-lung machine or something like that. He was not a happy camper, because we did the white glove treatment on all of our heart-lung equipment.
Sure,
and, but today it's maybe not so much.
Okay.
So, but yeah, Raymond was a good man, really was.
Well, in our closing few minutes here, this is your last opportunity to say anything to the younger generation who might be viewing this interview. Terry, do you have any closing thoughts or anything that we did not cover that you'd like to share with the group?
I think the most important thing that I would leave them with is maintain your work ethic that you had before coming to school and even after graduation, and have a better work ethic. But one of the most important things I hope I got across to many of the students was when you open up the patient's chart, well, the computer now, but when you open up that chart, find something in the chart you can relate to. It could be a birthday, it could be a location, it could be a name, a first name or a last name, but something you can relate to, like an aunt or an uncle, mother, father, whatever, and treat every patient as a member of your family. Only, I think once or twice I had the students say, Terry, I can't do this on this patient, I can't relate to them. I think they were from another country, this particular patient. I said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to pretend that today this is the uncle of one of our graduates from the same country. So he's here to have open heart surgery. And so that was quite remarkable. And then I had another one that the student couldn't relate to. And I said, well, the name is very similar to my niece from another state and my nephews and them over there. So we're going to treat this particular patient as if he was a member of the family. Come to find out, a couple of days later, my sister called me and asked me about this particular patient. And I couldn't tell her, obviously, that I knew exactly what it was. And so I said, well, I'm sorry. What you're going to have to do is, there's a lot of hospitals here in Houston that do open heart surgery, and I can't call them and check on them at all. What you might want to do is have his mother get a hold of me and see if he were done here, and then, but again, I can't just go into records and stuff like that. But if she wants me to stop by, I can. But she would have to invite me. And come to find out, he was a very, very close friend of my family. And that was a unique situation. So it's, again, and you feel good that you've treated patients like members of your own family. Even when we've done other perfusionists, we can't talk about it. We can't tell the students who they are or where they're from and things like this, but perhaps afterwards we can.
Sure.
With their permission.
Well, Terry, this has been a wonderful hour.
Pleasure.
We really want to thank you for spending the time today to do this interview for AMSECT. We've been friends for a long time, and it's just been a great afternoon with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks again.
What was the time? I